Hi, welcome to Unsightly Opinions. My name's Tamara. Today I want to talk about communication and how nonverbal communication is really complicated when you're blind or visually impaired. Communication has always been a challenge for me. A lot of the skills and tools I use to communicate effectively, I've had to learn by rote. I've had to learn by repeat exposure, and I've had to train myself into, because when you can't see someone's nonverbal cues, it can be difficult to know how somebody's interpreting what you're saying. As always, if you enjoy the content on this channel, you can like and subscribe, leave me video suggestions and comments down below, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Let's dive in. Communication is fundamental to how society operates. We have language, we have words, but language and communication goes beyond physical words, or if you're deaf, sign language. There are facial expressions, there are body movements, there are communication cues that we developed as a society that most people pick up on either consciously or subconsciously to gauge how a conversation is going. When you're missing or misinterpreting some or many of those cues, it can make communication a lot more challenging. There have been many studies over the years looking at language and communication and how we communicate as a society. Studies suggest that somewhere between 70 and 93% of communication is nonverbal, i.e. is not based on the words you are speaking. More modern studies have suggested that less than 35% of what is spoken can be interpreted through tone, inflection, or other auditory cues, and less than 10% is through actual words or the words that are spoken. So if you aren't picking up on those nonverbal cues because they are based on body language or facial expression or body positioning, because you can't see those things, you are missing out on more than half, and some would argue up to 90% of what is being communicated. That's a lot to be missing out on. And I know that there are many, like myself, who have struggled for their entire life trying to find ways to communicate. Trying to know when it's appropriate to jump in, know when it's appropriate to speak up or share an idea, or maybe know what someone's thinking, or know if somebody is engaged in what you're saying to them. Because of all of this, and because I've never had those skills, it's taken a lot of effort for me to learn social skills. If you were to talk to me in high school, I would have vomited because I was so anxious before giving a public speak. If I would have told myself 10, 15 years ago that I'd be public speaking or that I'd be sitting in front of a camera twice a week, I wouldn't have believed myself. Speaking and communicating caused me so much anxiety that I didn't know where to start. For me, a lot of the tools and skills that I had to develop were very much rote-based. I had to be told and reinforced through much of my adolescence to face the person that I'm speaking to look in the direction of their eyes, because that's what's socially acceptable. That's not something that came naturally to me. I had to learn by rote gesturing. I had to learn by rote certain facial expressions, or rather to hide certain facial expressions, because I was told people could read me like an open book because they could see the emotions flash across my face, and I was unaware of that. Many people have misinterpreted or misconstrued that anxiety for being very cold, and in one particular workplace, my nickname I found out after I left was the Ice Queen. And it wasn't that I wasn't unfriendly. I wanted to be friends with everyone. It's just I didn't know when I could speak up or when my thoughts were valid, so I was very quiet. And people saw that quietness as being stuck up, and they saw that quietness, that listening that I was doing to try and interpret what was going on, as being very cold. And that was shocking to me, because I am genuinely a very open person. I like to talk to people, but I don't always know where to start. So if this is something you can relate to, let me know, because I'm hoping I'm not the only one. I've spoken to a few other blind folks and they've mentioned the same thing. Either they feel like they need to fill the space by talking too much, and not letting anyone else talk, or they're much like me and they don't speak up enough. And I'm sure there's many people out there who have no trouble with this whatsoever, and it's just something that happens sometimes when you're missing out on those verbal and nonverbal cues. Another aspect to language that can be very complicated for somebody who's visually impaired is how vague language can be sometimes. When we're giving directions to someone, the typical response is over there. And with my sighted partner, I just say over there and I point. But that doesn't work for everybody, especially if you can't see those things or know where over there is. So we have to adapt our communication style sometimes so that someone like myself actually knows where over there is. We have to change that vagueness or that typical way of communicating so that it makes sense, or so that the instructions are clear for everyone involved. I think we, as a human race, can become lazy, and I think sometimes we go for the easiest option, which is not necessarily the best or the clearest. So if you are wondering how to give directions to somebody who's blind, if you can give a distance in feet, in inches, in meters, give a height, so it's on the table, it's on the floor, it's on the island, it's on the bookshelf, it's on the top shelf, some kind of height location, and then what it is relative to. On the left-hand side, left of the coffee mugs, in the center of the island, in the same container as the flower, that's going to be a much clearer idea of where something actually is located in space. The other thing that you want to be aware of is when you're gesturing or pointing is that's not necessarily obvious to everyone, and the people that you're interacting with, you may not know they have a visual impairment. Most people are fairly shocked when they find out I can't see, that I can't see where they're gesturing, that I don't know that they're reaching to give me a high five. So if we could give those cues verbally, or try and expand how we speak to be more inclusive, that would be very helpful for me. And I think it would be very helpful for a lot of folks. I find not only is communication hard, but knowing who I'm communicating with to be hard. One-on-one, I find no problems. The ebb and flow of conversation is fairly easy. You can typically interpret at least a little bit how somebody feels about what you're saying by their tone of voice. You can hear a smile if somebody's really happy. You can hear that they speed up how they speak if they're really engaged. Usually they're going to give those verbal or tonal indications that they're excited. But when you start getting large groups of people, like a meeting of 10 or 12 people, or a party, or a club, or those places where you don't necessarily know everybody who's there, or you don't necessarily understand all of the people's roles around you, or who's doing what, or who's who, that can be incredibly frustrating and really difficult. So at least for the first few times, if people could just say, it's Sam speaking, or it's John speaking, that would be really helpful. So if somebody can hear someone's voice, know their name and their role, or what they're doing, that can be really, really helpful. And especially if you run into somebody that you know in a different setting, so like out at the mall, and you usually see them at work. For me, I may not necessarily know that you're you. I'm really good at voices, but there are many times when it takes me a while to clue in to who somebody is, because a lot of that communication or a lot of that vocal memory is situational. So I think the best way you can communicate with somebody who's blind is don't overthink it. Be natural, be yourself, but don't get frustrated if the person needs to come back to you and say, hey, I need a little more detail. Hey, could you tell me exactly where that is? And if you say over here or over there, that's not going to be helpful. So if you could be specific when you're giving directions, as in left or right, forward, behind you, on the top shelf, on the floor, those are all going to make communication a lot easier. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts. What's the best tips and tricks you have for those who are sighted, trying to give advice or directions to people who can't necessarily see? What are some of the tips and tricks you've learned as a visually impaired person to know those social cues? Because That's something that I'm still working on, and I think I will be for the rest of my life. How do you get over that anxiety to know when to jump into a conversation, or what social cues give that away that somebody's wanting you to jump in, or it's okay to jump in? Those are all things I'd love to know. But that's all I have for you today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.